the tests revealed that there were some things that had happened earlier on in my childhood. They didn't mention broken bones that had healed by themselves, but later on I became aware of the fact that some of the abuse that I had suffered was quite horrific. And so my mum was arrested. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison. And I was confused on leaving hospital and entering what was now an assessment centre. It was my first group home, and it was very, very strange. It was an environment that was similar to a children's prison.
I just wanted to start this episode with a message of thanks. Thank you to everyone that chooses to listen to this podcast. By doing this, you're enabling me to reach more people so that they might learn how to unchain the pain to live a healthier, happier life. The feedback that I get from those that take action and are inspired by the show's content is incredibly rewarding. So I'd like to ask you a teeny tiny favour. You are truly able to change the course of this podcast, the types of guests I have on this show, and everything that I do by doing one simple thing. And that is simply hitting the subscribing button. The guests on this podcast are incredible because so many of you have hit that button. When I think of what I want to do this year on this show, this is fueled by the amount of you that subscribe, that tune in, and that comment on the show's content. So please keep subscribing, keep commenting. Any type of comment, please keep them coming, and keep sharing the shows that you find inspiring. I can't wait to see what this year brings for this show, for you, for my community, and for this platform. Thank you. Welcome to the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain. I am really, really, really looking forward to this conversation with the amazing Paris Bartholomew. Welcome to the show, Paris.
Thank you very much, Ruth. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm absolutely honoured to be on the show. Thank you.
I'm so pleased we got to connect, because we got to connect a couple of months ago, didn't we? Back at the One Voice Summit, which was Fatima's UK campaign for children. And I really want to dive into your story, because we met there, and it's a very poignant story that so many people need to hear, and what you have learned on that journey and how we can take your learnings into the practice of supporting children in the care system, and also children beyond the care system as well, so we can be more empathic and supportive in the whole journey that everyone goes on. But before we start your story, could you just introduce yourself, please, and tell us who you are and what you love to do?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Paris, and I am a care experienced psychologist. So I don't practice as a psychologist. And I think when I say I'm a psychologist, it's always important to point out that I'm an educational psychologist and not a clinical psychologist. I'm non-practicing, and I currently work as a motivational speaker, trainer and advocate for the care experience community, but also for upskilling and supporting people around trauma-informed care.
Amazing.
I do a lot of stuff in my spare time, but I would say in a nutshell, that's pretty much me.
Amazing. And what is it you're passionate about in life right now?
Gosh, where do I start? I'm passionate about people reclaiming their journey and their story, and living a life that speaks their truth. I think that there are so many ways that we're kind of pulled back from really sharing and being open about our journeys and our stories. And I think things have changed. Things are becoming a little bit more open. And I want to embrace that. And I think other people need to embrace that. And I'm really passionate about people living a life that is healthy from a holistic point of view. And I think there's a lot of focus on things that we can see, like the outer appearances. And I think there needs to be a bit more focus on what you're talking about brain health, about mental health, about the things that keep us healthy that we can't see.
Mm-hmm. And has there ever been a time, when you talked about reclaiming your story, has there ever been a time where you felt like you needed to hold back or hide your own personal story? Could you take us back to that point and how that manifested, and if you're willing, share your own personal journey?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to give your viewers a little bit of a trigger warning, because my story is not the happiest of stories, but I'd certainly want people to come away with a sense of how fulfilling my journey's been and how happy I am at this point in my life. But I would say that being care experienced was something that was always, for me, a bit of a stigma. I stigmatized it, and I felt that others did too. I don't know which came first, but I certainly know that it wasn't a story that I felt comfortable sharing.
Could you just explain to the viewers, because care experience is quite a new term, could you explain to people what care experience means?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. Good point. So from the broader perspective, care experience is anyone who has had a situation in their life during childhood where they have not lived with their birth parents. That includes babies and children who were fostered or adopted. It includes children who went into the care system, whether that was a children's home, foster carers, or a combination of those things for any period of time. Lots and lots of people and children who go into care for a variety of reasons. But I would say that the most common reason is the reasons that I went into care, which was for abuse and neglect. And lots of children have parents who are unwell, who are substance users, who may have mental health issues. One or more parent may have addiction issues. One or more parent may be unwell or may pass away. So there's such a wide range of reasons why a child might go into the care system. I went into the care system when I was 6. And without revealing my age, it was a long time ago, and the system has changed, has improved, but we've still got a long way to go. When I was 6, I went into care because my mum was sentenced to prison for multiple accounts of abuse and neglect to myself. I'm the oldest of 3 girls, so I was the only child at the time, because my sister, who's only 18 months younger than me, was actually removed from the family home by my dad. And of course, I always had questions around why my sister was removed and why I remained with my mum, who was very unwell. But it was a time when we didn't really understand mental illness. We didn't understand post-traumatic stress disorder. We didn't understand postnatal disorder. And as much as my mum was never diagnosed with anything, it became quite apparent to me later on in my life that my mum was very unwell and probably should have got mental health support as opposed to going into prison.
Yeah, okay. And that must, so, I mean, my daughter Lily, she's 6 now, and I can't imagine the trauma that would have been induced if she was to be taken away from us as a family. How did that, taking yourself back to the mind of a 6-year-old, which is very difficult for a 6-year-old to understand, how were you able to process it, or were you not? What went on at that time with you? Did you get removed?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's a question I've been asked many times. And when I answer it, I do actually try to go back to how I was thinking and feeling as a 6-year-old, which is a difficult thing to do. But the reason why I can do it is because from a psychological perspective, a lot of children that have had quite a lot of trauma do recall things that maybe other children may not recall at such a young age. And I can actually go back and really vividly remember that feeling. For me, it was very much rooted in the fact that I was at school at the time. My mum homeschooled me from 0 to 6. So I started school very late. But when I started school, all the assessments revealed that I was actually quite bright for my age.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into a class with children who were a little bit older than me.
Mm-hmm.
They were 7 going on to 8. I was 6, barely 6. And because of that, I was physically smaller than a lot of the other children in my class. And so they were very protective of me. And it was very clear very quickly that something wasn't right at home. So my teacher and I had a very, very good relationship. I cared about her. I trusted her. And in the short time that I've been at school, when she said, you're going to stay behind after school because there are some people that want to speak to you, I wasn't nervous because I trusted her and I had faith that she knew what she was saying and that she would be looking after me in whatever context that would be. And it was the NSPCC that visited that day that saw me and was so concerned about what they saw that I was whisked away straight away to the local hospital where I spent 2 weeks. And it was the hospital that was traumatic for me. It was a clinical environment. It was an environment that was alien to me. And I remember being very worried about what my mum would think, that I'm not at home and I need to be at home. I kind of vividly had that recollection. And I also had a social worker very early on who gave me my first ever toy, a cuddly toy, a little dog called Snoopy. And some of us might be old enough to remember Snoopy.
I loved it in the hospital when I was 4. Snoopy was my toy when I was in hospital at 4 with lots of grommets and stuff, and it was traumatic for a very different reason. But Snoopy was my toy that kept me safe. So I very relate.
So lovely.
Amazing.
Yeah, Snoopy became my little toy of safety. I love that.
That's lovely.
Toy. And I had also some recollections of being given hospital food, which was really unfamiliar to me.
Yeah.
I remember being very physically sick because I just couldn't keep the food down.
Yeah.
And then I remember being told that the tests revealed that there were some things that had happened earlier on in my childhood. They didn't mention broken bones that had healed by themselves, but later on I became aware of the fact that some of the abuse that I'd suffered was quite horrific. And so my mum was arrested and she was sentenced to 4 years in prison. And I was confused on leaving hospital and entering what was now an assessment centre. It was my first group home and it was very, very strange. It was an environment that was similar to a children's prison. Doors were locked at night.
And you were 6?
Furniture was... Say again?
You were 6?
I was 6. And there wasn't anywhere else to place me. And the child that was the nearest in my age group was 11. So there were no other children my age. It was what they called an emergency placement. They didn't feel there was anywhere else that they could put me at that time. And I was there over the Christmas period. Lots of children went home for Christmas. I didn't. I stayed there. And I was one of 4 children who stayed during the Christmas period. And they were caring and considerate and kind and concerned. And I felt safe, but I also felt very confused about being there and very confused about not living with my mum anymore. But it became quite apparent quite quickly that my mum had done something very wrong and that she was in a place where people went when you did bad things.
And did you have any before you were 6? Because I know this is mega hard as a child to understand, but you know, people will ask, there's loads of questions I can imagine the viewers now asking. Did you have any idea as a young child before 6 and the teacher realised something was wrong, that what you were experiencing in home was not normal? Or did you just assume everything was the same? Because I've had lots of people on the show who've experienced childhood abuse from their parents. And it tends to be that you have no idea that there's a different world out there.
No idea whatsoever. No idea there's a different world out there because my mum made that decision to homeschool me. So I didn't have a connection to peers, to friends, to other children that gave me a sense of this is what a normal childhood looks like.
Yeah.
No sense at all.
Yeah. And what about your dad? So you mentioned that your dad had taken your sister, your younger sister away, as 18 months younger than you.
That's
Where
right.
was he in? I mean, I know people will ask, so I'm going to have to ask a question.
Of
Where was
course.
he in
No,
the
please.
process of you
So
being put into care?
in the process, he was very, very aware, available, and supportive as much as he could be. So he visited me regularly. I don't remember a visit while I was in hospital, but certainly in the assessment centre, he visited quite regularly. And I remember a specific incident where there were only 2 Black children other than myself in that institution, and they tried to comb my hair and kind of style my hair, and they washed it with a kind of detergent that tangled it, and they ended up shaving it all off. And I recall my dad literally just seeing my hair and just being so upset and angry, and actually speaking to them and saying, look, what have you done to my daughter's hair? Like, what's going on here? So he was very supportive in the sense of he was present, and I had regular contact with him, and he was consistent throughout my childhood in terms of visits.
And was there a reason why you couldn't, I'm sure there is, a reason why you couldn't live with your dad who had your sister? What was I mean, I'm sure you didn't find it out necessarily at 6, but what was the reason behind putting you into care and not your sister, and your sister living with your dad? Or how did that manifest?
It manifested at the age of 12. When I was 12, there was a massive turning point in my development, especially in terms of my identity. My social worker at the time, I was living in the children's home at the time, I'd already had 3 foster placements that had broken down by the age of 12. So I was already in quite a distressed state in terms of just not feeling that I trusted adults, not feeling that I could depend on adults for my safety and my happiness. And my social worker really wanted to do something to, I think, give me a sense of identity, give me something to really hold on to. And she applied for me to get a passport so I could travel to the Caribbean. My birth mum is from a small island called Grenada in the Caribbean, and she made plans for me to travel there. Now, in order to get my passport, of course, I applied for my birth certificate. And when that came back, my father's name was not on it. It was completely blank. And a case conference was held. My dad was invited. My sister was there at the time. My sister was only 18 months younger than me. So we were kind of very much supporting each other and just kind of trying to work out what's going on here. And I was told formally that my dad isn't my biological dad. And that when he met my mum, she was already pregnant with me. So when he had an altercation with my mum and said, I'm leaving, I'm taking the children, of course, my mum said, oh, no, you're not. You're taking your child. And so he left with my sister because he had no rights.
So he had adopted you officially under the...
Hadn't done any of that official stuff. I think in the 70s and 80s, the Black community were quite suspicious of people in authority. The idea of going to social services to say something was going on at home, or making some sort of official plans to adopt me, I don't think was in their radar of thinking at that time, because Britain was a very different place in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. It really was a different place. And so you had this revelation at 12 that your sister was your half sister, and how did you work through that? Because I mean, there's loads of trauma here for you as a child, with all of this uncertainty, unknown, thinking that stuff is, you've got this map of your identity, and then that map has to be rewritten. So how did you work through that yourself personally, and who helped you on that journey?
I don't think I did work through it for much of my teenage years. I would say that much of my teenage years was a real struggle and a confusion between my sexual identity, my racial identity, not knowing who my birth father was. And for me, when I found out that my biological dad wasn't him, I was really distressed.
Absolutely.
Because in my mind, what I really thought was that I had one parent that I could call normal.
Yeah.
It kind of cancelled that out. It kind of made me believe that I didn't have this connection that I really needed.
Yeah.
He was amazing. He said, "I'll always be your dad." This doesn't change anything for me, but it wasn't enough for me to hear that. It was just all too much. And it was later on in my late teens when I went to a massive conference where I met lots of other care experienced young people, some of colour, some were mixed race, it was actually called Blackened in Care. So it was actually a conference for children who were in a care system who identified as from the global majority. And that opened my eyes and really gave me a sense of pride in who I was. Certainly sowed the seeds for me to start thinking about some pride in myself, because before that I really didn't have that, and I really didn't have a sense of who I was.
Amazing. And then obviously, through what was already becoming a teenager is already incredibly difficult, never mind the layers of childhood trauma that were put on top of that. How did you lever that experience to step into the amazing lady that you are today?
Bless you, thank you. I think it all starts and certainly finishes with being able to recognize that I'm not the only one that struggles in this life. And that conference told me that not only am I not the only one that's struggling, but I'm actually in a position to be able to walk alongside other people like myself. And very soon after that conference, I tried to get involved in groups like the Black and in Care group and a group called NAPIC, which was the National Association of Young People in Care. Started going to meetings. I started representing at meetings. I started speaking at meetings. I started doing what I call giving back. And I learned at 19, 20 that when you feel that you've got nothing, when you feel that you're nothing, there are a host of other people out there that have that same feeling that you can connect with and actually find a purpose within that. And I found my purpose within that. I found through doing voluntary work, through doing years and years and years of work with a homeless charity called Crisis at Christmas. When I left care, I was lonely at Christmas and I didn't want to spend Christmas on my own. I had friends and they all had families. And when you have conversations with friends, even when I was at uni, you have, new friendships, you meet new people, and somewhere in the early conversations, families mentioned. And I have two choices in that. I have a choice to not say anything, or I have a choice to share a small, quite private part of myself that says that I'm care experienced and I don't have what some people do have as family. And I chose from a very early age to be quite open about that, even with the shame that came along with it. And there was a lot of shame in the beginning. There was a lot of shame, not because I felt that I was to blame, but because I felt that the wider stigma around care experience very much blamed the child. In some situations, there was a lot of, well, you must have been in care because you did something wrong.
Yeah. Which is really sad, isn't it? Because a child is shaped by their environment, and even if a child is got behavioural issues, that's not their doing. And it's very sad that people take that view, because there's always a reason. It's very easy for society to look at the surface situation and not get curious about why behind it, which is great that your teachers were able to do that, because my God, if they hadn't, your situation would have been very different. So I'd love to just explore your journey a little bit differently through the eyes of an adult now, if you wouldn't mind, and just if you be able to explain, if you're willing to, what the abuse was that actually happened, and you don't have to, but if you would be willing to explain it, and then how that presented itself to the adults in the school, so that people can appreciate how children present. That should give you the warning signs. If that's like, would you mind doing that?
I'm quite happy to do that. I would certainly say that I'm not sure if my presentation is typical. The reason I mention that is because I'm part of a massive organisation called the Care Leavers Association, and it's actually quite rare for a child who is victim of trauma to have a parent go to prison for the trauma, for that abuse. It is quite unique. And I'm proud of that uniqueness, because what it gave me was a sense of, I've done nothing wrong here. This person has done something wrong. So my mum was very, very unwell. And so she had very unhealthy ideas about what a child should be able to do.
Yeah. Okay.
And what she would do is that she would try to get me to do things that was beyond the capabilities of someone of that age. And I have very vivid recollections of being 2, 3, 4, and 5, and being expected to do things that there was no way a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5 would be able to accomplish. And her homeschooling was a part of that. So I would be physically hit with objects, physically burnt with cigarettes, and my mum didn't smoke. Physically attacked with anything that was within her reach, and then put into situations like being locked into a room, a small room. I don't know if it was a room or a cupboard, but it was so small, and there wasn't any room for maneuver, and I would be in there for long periods of time in the dark.
Wow.
And then I would come out, and I was that child that learned very quickly that you don't bang on the door to get out, you don't shout, you don't scream, you don't cry, you wait until you are given that privilege of coming out, or that privilege of some food, or that privilege of... So neglect was withholding food, giving me food that was out of date, that was very physically inedible. There was a whole host of very, very traumatic things that my mum did. I recall verbal abuse, verbal name calling, and she did this thing where she would have her face very close to my ear and sort of shout and scream. I remember her feeding me at a time where I could feed myself, and she would sort of kind of shove the fork quite deep into my mouth. Some quite horrific things.
Wow, thank you for sharing. And then in terms of you presenting that, obviously you were 6, and you mentioned that she may have broken some of your bones as part of that abuse. How did you present, trying to take the view of an adult now, how did you present in the school that there was made people aware that something was really amiss in your home life?
So in the middle of summer, in early May, June, in the 70s, where we had these amazing summers, I would go to school in a roller neck sweater, thick tights. And when it came to PE, I would have a note: she's not to take part in PE. There was no opportunity for me to undress. There was no opportunity that my mum would give these people an opportunity to see the horrific scarring that I had. And when the NSPCC came to see me after school that day, I was asked to take my clothes off, and I heard, I will never forget the sound of that person holding back what I think was crying or a gasp at what she saw on my body. And obviously it was that horrific that I was taken straight to hospital and had a few weeks of tests done. So lots of scarring, lots and lots of wounds at different stages of healing. And I recall in my early childhood just being very embarrassed of not wanting to wear a skirt, not wanting people to ask questions about what are these marks. And I remember one of my foster carers in the early days of being sort of 9, 10, 11, I remember recalling her having a telephone conversation with a friend that was, I think, one of the people that went to her church.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall her just listening at the door and her saying, the scars are in her scalp, the scars are in her back, the scars are, just literally listing
Mm-hmm.
the horrific scars I had, and how she just couldn't understand how I'd kind of got through that, and how my mum could have done that.
Right. So when you went into the hospital, and obviously that was a traumatic experience in its own right, how did you back into the world of the adult, looking into your situation as a child? How did you heal from the physical wounds in the hospital? What did you have to go through in order to do the healing, so adults can kind of get a view as to the process that you went through from an adult perspective, if that's okay?
Yeah, I to be fair, I don't recall a lot of that. I recall a lot of tests and a lot of
Okay.
back and forth, like X-rays and different doctors whose names I don't recall,
Mm-hmm.
kind of coming in and introducing themselves and being really kind, really supportive.
Mm-hmm.
I recall lots of bandages. I recall sort of lots of, but a lot of the wounds had previously healed,
Mm-hmm.
because this was in the papers.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of the headlines was mother's 2-year reign of terror
Mm-hmm.
on child. And I remember reading that thinking, I wonder why they think that before going into care, my mum did this for 2 years. I wonder why they don't understand that my mum actually did this from the day I was born, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm concerned, and have been concerned, about the possible prenatal things that may have happened to me.
Absolutely,
But
yeah.
yeah, so I think it's interesting that that was the newspaper report, but actually my understanding is that my mum was always that way, and that by the time I was hospitalised, a lot of natural healing had taken place.
Mm-hmm.
I recall my mum giving me something to hold onto my head because my head was bleeding. I recall just never going to hospital, but just having things, pains, sleepless nights and things because of wounds. But by the time I was hospitalised, I think that that was more minimal.
And of course, as a child, you can't cry about it because that would result in more trauma and abuse, because of the pains that you're experiencing. So
Yeah.
how did you, so when we started the conversation, we talked about the visible wounds, but then we talked about the invisible wounds that are inside ourselves and inside our mind. How did you work through what is typically invisible trauma, because you can't see it from the scars, but you are scarred internally? How did you work through that? Because that is often can be a lot harder and lot longer healing journey than the physical wounds we see.
You're absolutely right, Ruth. And I would start by saying that healing isn't linear. Healing isn't you start there and you get there and there. Healing for me certainly wasn't that way. And I think that my healing journey started when, in those early days, I was doing the voluntary work and meeting other traumatized children, other children who had been through other types of horrific trauma. And the awareness that my life wasn't like anybody else's life also started the healing journey, because I had to understand what my journey was before I could heal from it.
Mm-hmm.
The other big thing, which I did when I was quite young, was that I learned how to forgive my mum.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting for anybody that's has a similar situation to me that forgiveness is the way forward, because it's not an easy thing to do. And I don't think anyone should be talked into doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it was the catalyst to healing. It was one of the things that I really needed to do, to be able to say to myself, actually, your mum did the best that she could do with what she knew. As crazy as that sounds, in light of what she did do to me, I have no idea what trauma my mum suffered. I have no idea what her past looked like. But just from what I understand of psychology, of philosophy, and of the world, she couldn't have had a good childhood herself. And I used that empathy as a kind of stepping stone to forgiving my mum. And forgiveness was part of my healing journey. My healing journey then kind of took me to a place where I had to understand that trauma has really changed the way I view myself. I'm very passionate about Dr. Vessel van der Kolk and, you know, the way in which trauma is held in the body. I'm very passionate about Gabay Mator, who talks about trauma's not what happens to you, but what you do with what happens to you and how you process what happens to you. And I'm also quite passionate about, is it Dr. Amen that did the brain, all the stuff around brain health?
Dr. Daniel Amen,
I mean, honestly, just all of these people that talk a lot about the way in which trauma is stored. And I know for a fact that, you know, a lot of the somatic practices that I do, so I do Tai Chi, I've done Tai Chi for years. I've always been very physical as a person. And I feel that a lot of that stuff has helped me to embody myself. And that embodiment has allowed me to sit with the sad moments, sit with the PTSD, which I was diagnosed with, sitting with flashbacks, being able to sit and breathe through them, using mindfulness, using meditation, using every kind of tool. I've got this massive toolkit of things that I really feel has contributed towards my healing process.
I love that. And I think so many people don't have those tools. And I think importantly to recognise that those tools are not always necessarily available through the traditional routes. And it's finding the right tools that are going to work for you personally. And I love that you brought out the somatic element of trauma, because it's not often really talked about or understood about how trauma can be expressed somatically. So I wondered if you could explain what the somatic element of trauma is, and if you could give some examples of how you would express that trauma encoding, and then how you work through that from using somatic tools.
I think I mentioned earlier that around the age of sort of 12, 13, 14, I had a real distrust of people in authority. When I left care, I was 17. I got my flat at 17. I was so young. But I really knew where I wanted to go in life. And I was at college. And from college, I went straight to uni. And I learned that learning about me, my trauma, my body, and my triggers was the first step. Just being able to understand who I am from every kind of angle is part of that somatic practicing, because for me, somatics is about the way in which there are layers of embodiment, and those layers of embodiment have to be unpicked bit by bit. And sometimes you have to use different things to unpack different areas. For example, at one point during my 20s, I was using marijuana. Now, I wasn't using marijuana because I was just this crazy person that was addicted to drugs. There were some things that were happening that I felt that marijuana was able to sort of underlyingly dampen down. And it was almost like a coping mechanism for me. And with somatic practice, it's about understanding that everybody has coping mechanisms. What are you trying to cope with? Let's scratch the surface and really see what is it that we need to do to hold. And I found through scratching the surface that I felt very unsafe within my own body. And that lack of safety meant that in the wider world, I just couldn't express myself in the way that I wanted to.
Could you explain a bit more about that? So could you describe the feeling of unsafe within your own body? What do you mean by that? How does that
I think
manifest?
that in some situations where you've had lots of physical or sexual trauma that's kind of impacted your physical body in some sense, you're then unable to trust your body, trust what it does and what it should do. In terms of fight and flight and freeze and fawn, we're wired to be able to cope with certain different environments. And in those environments, we're supposed to be able to survive. And I think that through years of that physical abuse from my mum, my body felt as if it couldn't survive within itself. It couldn't protect itself because I couldn't protect myself from my mum. I was a child. And so mentally, I kind of, almost like an onion, I had layers of this inability to protect myself if I needed to.
That's just because you froze.
It was I would say it was a freeze as a child in terms of the way I was around my mum. Once I became a teenager and adolescent, that anger turned to aggression.
Okay, so I can relate to that.
Rather than freeze, I became very defensive, very attacking, so it was almost like a complete flip from freezing to attacking. I was aggressive in situations where I didn't need to be aggressive because I felt so unsafe.
I think that's a massively important thing to reflect upon, because I can relate to how you, as a child, when you've had a traumatic experience and you have to freeze, that your response in it as a teenager or as a young adult, until you understand your behaviour, is aggression. Because it's almost like, certainly from my experience, is that you have stored this anger in your body because you haven't been able to release it as a child to protect yourself, because that's one of your typical human responses is the fight. Your response has been freeze, but actually you're angry and you really want to fight. And so when you get to a situation where you don't need to freeze and you can fight, it's almost like that fight is amplified.
Definitely.
Because you are releasing this stored energy.
Absolutely.
No longer is restricted by this, I'm not safe. I'm going to make myself safe. You are going to get, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, like they say. You're going to get everything. I'm going to throw everything at you, and it's almost uncontrollable when you release it until you know how to manage it and be at peace with it.
Definitely.
Is that have I described that? That's my experience. But
I think so. I think that's exactly, and also just kind of continuing that explanation of somatic experiencing, I think that kind of, for me, hits the mark in terms of what somatic for me is about, just releasing and also breaking down that wall, because of course I built a wall around myself, a very, very impenetrable wall. And when I forgave my mum, I absolutely remember that there were sort of tangible pieces of this wall that started kind of coming away. And that somatic experiencing allows you to really face that wall and realize, actually, I'm now in a position where I can begin opening up and really allowing myself to feel and to actually experience some of that anger, but then use it creatively. And that's the other thing that I talk about a lot, is being able to express myself in a creative way, use anger through poetry, through writing, through any kind of form of expression.
And we see this a lot in people who have had other types of trauma, where I'll just take an example. When you lose a child to suicide, is you see the parents of those children get very angry, and they redirect the anger in an incredibly positive way to raise awareness of the situation that they've gone through and help others. So I think when we can channel that anger outwardly positively, which is what you've been able to do, it can be very effective. But when we channel it inwardly to ourselves, it can be incredibly destructive. Was there ever a time where you channeled it internally that resulted in the destruction? And was that the trigger behind the marijuana, was to try and stop self-destruct?
Definitely. The trigger behind the marijuana, the trigger behind other drug use. I think that lots and lots of people who use substances are either blocking out pain that they just cannot manage, or using it to sort of fulfill and kind of I've worked, when I did my psychology degree, I worked at the Priory for a while and did a lot of work and met so many wonderful human beings who, due to their trauma, were using sort of food as a substance, or using prescription drugs as a substance, and alcohol as a substance. Absolutely. And for me, definitely, drug use was all about partly numbing the pain and partly, filling this massive hole of a gap that was anger, loneliness, and all of these other emotions that I just couldn't sit with. And I had to learn to sit with these things, and not just sit with them, but as you've just said, and as I mentioned earlier, channel them into something a lot more positive.
And sometimes I think you don't have to channel them into anything, but you have to let them go. So I think certainly with kids who are storing lots of anger, we need to give them that opportunity to safely release it. Yes. And it's okay to be angry. So it's totally okay. Yeah. It's an incredibly powerful emotion. And we need to recognise that it is an emotion. It's wanting you to move forward or away from something, and being at peace with the anger and being okay that is an emotion that we can express. It can be quite challenging sometimes to let it out, because it's overwhelming.
Definitely. Definitely. And I think we're all a product of our conditioning. And I do Samaritans telephone helpline, and I often talk to people, women especially in their 30s, 40s and 50s, who have been in relationships for years with people who are so aggressive, abusive, verbally and otherwise, and they don't feel that they can express that anger, and they're constantly feeling that need to hold back. And as you say, when you hold this in and hold it back, it destroys you from the inside out. Chronic stress is, I think, part of that. It's part of that inner anger and that inner kind of ball of anger and all these other emotions just being stored in there. And then I think that, from a physiological point of view, all of the hormones and things that are expressed when you're stressed. Yeah. And we don't talk about stress half of much that we should be talking about. Stress. Chronic stress, years and years of it over time. All of these poisons and these, hormones being released in the body because of stress over a period of time. You're then looking at all sorts of health conditions. Yeah. And I think, going back to the very simple ones that get released when we are under pressure is cortisol. So our bodies naturally want to cry to release cortisol. When you suppress the crying, you're not allowing the natural release of this neurotransmitter that needs to come out. Yeah. So I think when you condition a child or yourself or somebody else to not do something that is a natural response, you're suppressing all of these toxins that we create as part of releasing whatever we need to release in that person's body. And like you say, absolutely, it can lead to chronic stress and chronic diseases as well. And I know you mentioned Bessa van der Valk and Dr. Gabor Mate, who all talk about how trauma can, if we hold on to it, can lead to chronic health conditions further down the line. And Definitely. So that's why it's so important to release it. How did you work through releasing it through your adult
where were there any like key pivot points from the emotions that you held on to that you're like, oh, I can be a little bit more at peace now? How did you work
Yeah.
through that, and where were the moments of joy in working through that experience?
There were many moments of joy. I think I really love spending time in nature. I love walking. I do lots and lots of walking. And I recall one day I'd been doing this short course in mindfulness at the London Buddhist Centre many years ago, and I was walking and I just sat, removed my shoes, and planted my feet in the earth and lay on my back. So my knees were bent and I'm just lying on my back, looking at these clouds.
I do that.
Do you? There's something about your feet touching the earth.
Yeah.
Your body's at peace. You just relax. There's nobody around you. You've got the bees buzzing. You've got the flies. And it's just, and these clouds are moving above you. And I just started breathing, just working through breath work, because breath work is so powerful.
Oh, yeah.
And I just recall this feeling, this random feeling that it was almost, I use the word bliss because I can't think of any other word.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, you can let go. There's no need to hold on anymore. You're doing what you want with your life at this point in your life. You're working, you're self-employed, you're doing what you want with your life. You've got some amazing friends who, you know, you meet up with regularly, you do fun stuff together, and you've made peace with the one person in your life that caused you a lot of hurt and pain. And if you can do that, Harris, you can do anything. And it just was a moment of just understanding that all of that hope that I had as a child, because one of the things that kept me going during childhood specifically was just this hope, this little glimmer of hope that things would get better as soon as I was able to make my own decisions about what I wanted with my life. Because the most difficult thing for me being in care was not being able to make my own decisions about where I went, who I lived with, or when I moved. And from the age of 6, when I went into care, to when I got my flat at 17, I'd had 14 moves.
Wow.
14. Like 14. I never laid roots anywhere. There was no give Paris a hug. There was no sitting on a lap and having a bedtime story. All the normal things that children have that bring them through childhood. I never had any of those things. And I had to give them to myself. I learned in that moment, in that release, in that moment of bliss, that I've got the ability to give myself all the things that I didn't have as a child. All of the love, all of the, you know, and the only way I can do that is by accepting that this is where I am, and really having a sense of where I want to be and who I want to be. And I just knew I didn't want to be caught up in trauma. I didn't want trauma to be my life. I wanted to move beyond it and to grow out of it.
I love that. And I think, you know, when you talk about the opportunity to give that to yourself, did that help you fall in love with yourself, with you, who you were?
Yeah, definitely. It really did. It helped me move beyond. It's not always about what people think. Because in my experience of working with people, it's one of the biggest things that seems to dominate people's thinking and almost stop that glow, stop that ability to just reach full potential in life. It's just that constant worrying about what people think. And as much as being in care was never a positive experience for me, it gave me some things. It gave me the ability to not really worry too much about what people think. It gave me the ability to really find my super strength within that.
I love that. And with that in mind, I'd love to know for you, what does optimal brain health mean for you personally in the context of your life's journey?
I think for me, optimal brain health is about understanding that the brain and the mind governs everything. It governs what we think, what we feel, and what we think and what we feel feeds into how we behave. I know that we don't all have a choice, but at some stage, we have to reclaim our power and understand that there is some choice in what we do. And I'm not saying that life is black and white, but we can make skillful choices and we can make unskillful choices. And those choices will always impact our brain health. I think something as simple as, oh, I'm going to go to the pub for a few drinks after work. I'm only going to have 2 drinks. 2 drinks turns into 4 drinks. 4 drinks turns into, oh, it's midnight and I've got to be up at 6 a.m. Now, by the time you get home, if you have 5 hours sleep instead of 8 hours sleep, that has not just impacted your morning, but actually that will impact your day, and that will impact your brain, your ability to function, your ability to notice and be mindful throughout the day is going to be impaired. I just believe that we need to sort of reclaim responsibility for some of the choices we make. And I think brain health is the choices we make about what we eat, about our sleeping patterns, about what we do to relieve stress, about whether we're mindful, and about how much we give back. Because one of the questions that I remember really loving and reading on your briefing sheet was around values. And I'm so passionate about empathy and compassion. I just believe that if we were more empathetic and more compassionate to ourselves, to others, life would just look completely different. And I think it does start with loving yourself and believing that you're capable of doing these things for yourself. And understanding that optimum brain health doesn't come from out there. You've got everything we need is within us. We just need to tap into it.
I so agree with you, and I love that you said that, because I think in today's world, and I can't reflect on yesterday's world, but today's world, I think we have lost some of that power, and we've given it away to maybe the medical profession, or we've given it away to social media, or we've given it away to something or someone that diminishes our own inherent power and our inherent ability to choose what we can do. And I think because we have given that power away, we forget actually how truly powerful and amazing we as human beings are, and how amazing our brains are, especially when it comes to trauma. Like, if you reflect on your journey, how incredible you are as an individual to have gone as a child with very limited, worldly experiences, to have survived what you've described, that your brain in your body has been able to bring you here today to come on this podcast, and to be able to heal on that journey and give your healing messages to others is such an incredible power that you have. And we all possess our own unique power based on our experiences. But if we don't reflect and love ourselves and embrace and I don't know if celebrate's the right word for this, but embrace the learnings that we've had on that journey and seek to help others. Like you said, you were not in the boat alone. There were lots of people in a similar boat, and that helped us relate and have that connection. I think when we can do that, we can really empower others, and underneath all of that is empathy, like you said, and compassion. With that in mind, just diving very briefly into the 5 pillars of brain health that I talk about, and I know you mentioned one, which is connection to yourself, and the most important value sounds like empathy and compassion that guide you in life. If we reflect on the thoughts, so 5 pillars is our feelings, our actions, our connections, our thoughts, and the surroundings that we've grown up in and the surroundings that we're in today. When you think of the thoughts that you've had, and you must have had thousands over the course of your experiences, what thought have you in the past told yourself that you now know isn't true?
A really good question. I think I told myself that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough for this world because I was broken.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I know for a fact that I'm not the only one in terms of being care experienced and having that feeling that you're this broken human being, you're this individual that actually isn't fixable. You're just broken. And I know that that thought fueled my decision not to have children. I didn't understand intergenerational trauma when I had that thought, but somewhere in my thinking was this idea that a broken human being will give birth to a broken human being. There was some kind of weird thing that I had, and I made a very conscious decision at quite a young age that I wasn't going to have children of my own.
Mm-hmm. Were you fearful of that? Because I can also relate to that. Were you ever fearful that it would be history repeating itself?
Yeah, definitely. I picked up a message quite young that lots of people who traumatized children had been traumatized.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I did the math, and 2 + 2 = 5. I mean, I just kind of saw that picture as, well, where does that leave me? What does that say about me? And what can I do in order for that to never be a thing? And it's sad that I made that decision, but it didn't stop me becoming a foster carer, and it didn't stop me being a kinship foster carer to my youngest sister. And it didn't, so that was a thought and a belief that I had for a long, long time.
Yeah, and I'm so pleased you shared that, because I'm sure there's so many other people that can relate to that thought. Certainly I can. When you've been through a childhood traumas that may involve abuse, that you're fearful because somebody's told you, or you've read it in the newspaper, that you're going to repeat history and do it to someone else, and the fear factor that you might even contemplate doing it, obviously for yourself, has been enough to draw the line on that.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure there's thousands upon thousands of people out there who've had that same experience, that same thought, that what if I did this to somebody else?
Yeah.
So thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that.
You're welcome.
What is next for you on your journey? Because if you could explain where your journey is now, and you mentioned that you're a foster carer, and all of the work that you do, all the talks that you give and the teachings. What's next for you? What's your journey going to look like?
So I mean, I'm really grateful to be here. I'm grateful for my life and where I am at the moment, and I want to build on that. I did write a book, an autobiography, and I've been looking for a publisher for some time, but I'm new to writing, and I have never had, I never went to creative writing school or anything. I just wrote the book. So for me, the next step would be to get a publisher, to really get my story out there. And I've written the book kind of as a kind of survive, grow, inspire. I'm surviving, I'm growing, but I'm also wanting to inspire people to do amazing stuff with their lives. It's not about a sad story. It's about a story that can inspire people to do great things. So for me, the next part of my journey hopefully would be to be a speaker that's international and not just national. I currently talk all over the UK, which I absolutely love. I love the opportunity to face an audience and really share elements of my story that, can connect with them. And I'd love to do that internationally. I think that would be amazing.
Amazing. And I'm sure you will get your book published, because I'm sure there is such a need for books like this. And I remember when I was a young adult or a teenager, that having books like the one I'm sure you've written helped you realise you're not alone. Yeah. And it's having that relatability and knowing that there is always hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and somebody's been through that tunnel before you and can help guide you. And with that in mind, Paris, how can people get hold of you so you can hold their hands through the tunnel they may be going through?
So I'm on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, Paris Bartholomew. Also, I have my own website, which is at parisbartholomew.com. I'm all over Snapchat and TikTok. I'm one of those people that are just, I try and put stuff out there all the time. I've got a YouTube channel. I'm just constantly trying to put little bits out there to kind of build a bit of a social media and social profile.
Yeah, I love that. So do make sure you connect with Paris, because she's got such an amazing story, and I really want to celebrate you for being you and leveraging your experience to really help others. What one piece of advice would you like to leave the listeners and viewers with for anybody that is struggling with a childhood experience that they're having difficulty working through, maybe the anger that we talked about earlier?
I'm going to say one of the most obvious things to say really is that communication is key. Communication isn't just about telling yourself whatever narrative you're telling yourself. Communication really is about reaching out. And I know that one of the hardest things to do is to ask for help, but it's one of the most powerful things that you can do. And asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. I think I'd like people to know that.
I love that. Thank you for that. And remember that, everyone, this show is all about brain health, unchaining your pain. You're not stuck with the brain you have. You have the power to take back control. And Paris, I am so honoured you've been able to come on the show. Paris Bartholomew has kindly been here to share her journey and show you how you can do exactly that. Thank you, Paris.
You are so welcome, Dr. Ruth. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
I've really loved it. Thank you. And I look forward to connecting and continuing our conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you.